At Christmas dinner, my mom made a joke about me. Everyone went silent. Christmas was supposed to be a time for laughter, food, and family. Growing up, it had been just that. A whirlwind of lights, gifts, and small chaos that somehow felt warm. But that year, things were different. I had been working hard, saving, and trying to manage life like an adult, while my family had always existed in their bubble where my brother, as usual, was the star. I didn't anticipate that a single joke could unravel everything I had silently endured for years. But it did. The dinner started off like any other family holiday gathering. My parents had spent the day preparing a massive spread. Turkey, mashed potatoes, casseroles, and desserts, all laid out perfectly. My brother, who seemed to glide through life effortlessly, arrived late, as usual, with a casual grin. My cousins, aunts, and uncles filled the room with chatter, laughter, and the usual chaos. I sat quietly, observing, sipping my drink, feeling a dull sense of anticipation and anxiety that had built over years of subtle tension. Everything seemed normal until the moment my mom decided to make her joke. It was innocent, or so she thought. She laughed lightly, nudging my brother and pointing at me across the table. Well, at least my name learned how to cook for themselves, finally. Maybe they won't starve next year. The room froze instantly. Silence. Not the polite, mild kind, but the thick, awkward kind that makes you want to disappear. I felt every eye on me, the weight of decades of subtle judgments and favoritism pressing down in a single instant. My father's fork paused mid-air. My brother smiled awkwardly, not knowing how to respond. Even the youngest cousin stopped chewing. I could feel my chest tightening. It wasn't just the joke, it was the context. Every comment I had ever heard growing up, every slight, every indirect message that I was less than, extra, or responsible enough to manage, but never enough to be celebrated, it all came rushing back. The room had gone silent, not because the joke was funny, but because everyone realized the weight behind it. It wasn't Christmas cheer. It was years of unspoken truths laid bare in a single sentence. I remember trying to laugh it off, a weak, hollow sound that didn't reach my eyes. My parents didn't notice. They were too busy moving on to other topics, pretending nothing happened. My brother smirked nervously, and someone tried to tell another story, to fill the silence, but the moment had passed. I could feel it in every corner of the room. The tension, the judgment, the unspoken acknowledgement that the joke had hit deeper than anyone wanted to admit. The next few minutes were a blur. I picked at my food, trying to keep my hands busy while my mind raced. I thought about the years I had spent being the responsible one, the quiet one, the one who made sacrifices while my brother was coddled, praised, and given the freedom to fail without consequence. I thought about the promotions I had taken extra shifts for, the bills I had quietly paid, the support I had offered them for decades. All of it invisible, all of it expected, all of it unappreciated. And now, at this dinner meant to celebrate family, it had been reduced to a punchline. After dinner, I went outside to get some air. Snow was falling lightly, and the cold hit my face in a way that almost cleared my head. I realized, standing there alone in the quiet, that something had shifted. I couldn't continue like this. I couldn't continue allowing jokes, small slights, and subtle favoritism to define my role in the family. It was exhausting, and that night, I knew I had to draw a line. The aftermath of the joke lingered for days. My mom didn't acknowledge it again, pretending that nothing had happened. My brother didn't apologize, or even comment further, because in his mind, it was just a joke. My father avoided eye contact with me, probably sensing that I was hurt, but not knowing how to address it. And me? I stayed quiet, as I had learned to do for years, but inside, something had hardened. I started thinking about all the times I had laughed along, nodded along, and allowed myself to be the butt of jokes while they celebrated my brother. Birthday parties where my gifts were minimal compared to his. Holidays where my accomplishments were overlooked. Meals where he was praised and I was expected to keep quiet. I realized that the joke was the culmination of decades of patterns. That night, it wasn't just about the joke. It was about everything I had tolerated in silence. Over the next week, I reflected deeply on my relationship with my family. I considered cutting contact, setting boundaries, or at the very least, asserting myself more clearly. I thought about how long I had placed their happiness above my own, how often I had bent, compromised, and minimized my needs. That joke at dinner had been small in words but massive in implication. It was the night I realized I could no longer be treated as the invisible child, the one who silently absorbed years of favoritism. I also thought about my brother, who had always seemed oblivious to the imbalance. Part of me wanted to confront him, to explain how years of small decisions, small prioritizations, had built up into a lifetime of inequity. But I realized he might never understand. He had always been allowed to fail without consequence, to receive without effort. Confronting him wouldn't change his perception of reality. And so, I resolved that the confrontation I needed most was not with him, but with myself and with my parents. I started setting boundaries slowly. I declined favors that felt manipulative, said no to requests that drained me emotionally, and prioritized my own needs in ways I hadn't before. It wasn't easy. There was guilt, there were threats of disappointment, and there were moments where I questioned whether I was overreacting. But every time the memory of that Christmas joke came back, every time I remembered the silence in the room and the way it felt like everyone realized the truth except me, I knew I was justified. Over time, the dynamic began to shift slightly. My parents realized I was serious, though they never admitted fault. My brother started noticing that I no longer complied automatically with requests or tolerated jokes, though he still didn't fully understand why. And I finally felt a sense of control over my life, a sense that I was no longer a passive participant in their family drama. That night, I realized I wasn't just done with a joke. I was done with a family dynamic that had quietly, subtly, and consistently undervalued me. Looking back, I can see that the joke itself wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was the pattern, the accumulation of years where my contributions, sacrifices, and emotions were invisible, while my brother's missteps and successes dominated attention. That Christmas joke was the crystallization of a lifetime of imbalance. It was the moment I saw it clearly, understood it, and decided I couldn't participate in it any longer. I've learned since then that family isn't always a source of unconditional love and fairness. Sometimes it's a series of complicated relationships, a hierarchy of favoritism, and decades of unspoken expectations. And sometimes the only way to survive emotionally is to set boundaries, to walk away, or to at least refuse to participate in dynamics that harm your sense of self. That night was painful, yes. It stung more than any argument, more than any confrontation, more than any small slight I had ever endured. But it was also liberating. For the first time in my life, I recognized that my worth was not defined by my parents' approval or my brother's comfort. That night, I realized I was done tolerating a family dynamic that undervalued me, and I finally allowed myself to feel something I had long denied, that my own needs mattered too. Since that Christmas, I've tried to recalibrate my relationships. I still see my family occasionally, but I no longer let their jokes or their expectations dictate my emotional state. I've become more assertive, more protective of my boundaries, and more willing to prioritize myself over pleasing them. Now, when I think back to that dinner, I don't just remember the silence. I remember the clarity. I remember the liberation. I remember the night I realized I was done with tolerating their pattern, done with being invisible, and finally, done with allowing their favoritism to define my self-worth. And for the first time in years, I felt like I could finally breathe.